Okay.
Sure, sounds good.
Feel free, the floor is yours.
Kayla, do you want to go first? Okay, I'll go first.
You've got top billing, Mike.
Okay.
You go then.
Well, that usually means you go last.
So you want to be like, and featuring Michael Kleen.
Hey,
I can go first then.
I was on a marquee once that said Michael Kleen and tacos. So
you never want to open for tacos. I told them once, I told them 1,000 times. Spinal Tap first and Puppet Show last.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So, well, if you want to be Puppet Show, then I'm going first. Hi, everybody. My name is Kelly Bryan. I'm here to talk to you tonight about my experiences with various haunted places in Coles County and southeastern Illinois, or east central. I don't know what you call that region of Illinois, but I'm assuming you know where it is because you're here. I'm a good friend of Mike's. I realized, Mike, I met you when I was 18, which is now half of my lifetime I've known you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a scary thought.
You know what? It's good to have cool people in your life, so I will accept it. I guess yeah, what else to say? I was going to introduce myself as I'm here, and my profession, I guess, that I'm admitting to is I'm the host of the Blooms and Barnacles podcast, which is about James Joyce's Ulysses, and probably won't come up again.
What years did you go to Eastern?
I went to EIU from 2002 until 2004 when I transferred to Columbia College in Chicago.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Yeah, I abandoned the bright lights, big city.
Yeah. My name is Michael Kleen. I attended Eastern from 2000 to 2008. So I was there long enough to get a PhD, but I didn't. I just got a master's in history. And my bachelor's was in philosophy. So I kind of got into writing about ghost stories and folklore history of Coles County because I was always interested in those subjects. I was interested in the ghost stories of Chicago area where I grew up. And when I went to college, I realized I was in a good position to actually visit some of these places and do research about them. And it didn't really come to me overnight. You know, it was a years-long process. And in 2004, I wrote a little book called Tales of Coles County, kind of historical fiction stories set during Coles County history. And I recently came out with the new edition that I had here. That's the cover of the new edition. And even today, I'm learning things about Coles County. I added over 100 new pages to the book with new ghost stories, history, like just weird information about Coles County and Eastern Illinois University. A lot of things that I wanted to research in the past, but I just didn't have the resources available to me. Mostly like true crime. Way back when I first started this, I was able to read a little bit of information about different unsolved murders in Coles County, but I didn't really have the resources at the time or the knowledge to do a lot of research on that. But today you have things like newspapers.com where you can go and do a search for people's names and find all kinds of articles about it. So I was finally able to write about all those cases that I wanted to back in the day. I have a little show and tell for later, maybe when talking about Ashmore Estates. But I have some of my original photos from like 2002 when I used to go there with some of my friends and just explore the place. That was back before Scott Kelly bought the place, before it became famous, and everybody, you know, wanted to put it on TV and all that stuff. So I've kind of been writing about this for a long time. In my personal life, I live in Virginia now. I have for the past 2 years. I'm married. We have a corgi that is adorable. And I was in the Army for like 5 years, living up in New York most of the time. Oh yeah, and my wife is yelling at me that we have a baby on the way. So we're having a third addition to our family. Becky, I just got a message from my friend Donna. She says that it won't let her join the meeting. I'm going to ask her if she registered. So, I guess a logical place to.
Sorry, I was muted. She popped up and I hit enter or allow her to come in, and it said she was joining, but then she went away. So tell her to try again.
All right, so let's give a little history. So I guess we decided to talk about Ashmore Estates and Mary Hawkins at Pemberton Hall because those are the two most famous legends to come out of Coles County. And we both have personal experiences with both of those places. Pemberton Hall, okay, to begin with, it was built in 1907, I believe. No. So 1907 is when they authorized the money to build Pemberton Hall. It was finished in 1909. And then there was a woman from England named Mary Elizabeth Hawkins, who became the dorm mother, quote unquote. I don't know if that was the official title. There was actually a woman named Estella Gross was the original headmistress, but Mary Hawkins took over very soon after she came to be here in America, and she was there for quite a while, from about, let's see what I have here, from 1910 to 1917. She was a dorm mother, and she was very well liked and respected by many people. She left her mark on Pemberton Hall. There's I believe, a plaque currently dedicated to her in the dorm room. And she left her position in March 1917 due to complications from syphilis. She basically, her brain deteriorated, and she ended up dying in the Kankakee State Mental Hospital. Actually, almost, actually today would be the anniversary. She died at the age of 41 on the night of October 29th, 1918. So talk about a coincidence. So ever since then, people have thought in one way or another that her ghost was haunting Pemberton Hall, which is the oldest all-female dormitory in the state of Illinois. Some people believe her ghost is like a protective spirit that protects the girls that are living there. Um, Other people, and this legend seemed to have had its origins in the 1970s. It became more like Mary was a student who was murdered in the dorm, or in another version, um, the student is unnamed and Mary is there, like watching over her, and when the student is violently attacked and murdered. So the student's ghost is said to haunt the hall. And there was a lot of weird incidents. People talked about furniture being rearranged, um, footsteps that would appear in rooms that couldn't be washed away. Um, Somebody said, they saw a girl in a nightgown asking for safety pins before disappearing at the door to the fourth floor. And so the fourth floor has kind of been incorporated in a legend because it's been closed for a very long time. And people kind of wonder, like, what's going on up there? Why is it closed? They say that it's closed because that's where the girl was murdered, and there's an old piano up there. So they say that she was murdered while playing the piano. And Kelly can fill in, a lot of this, but
Yeah.
essentially, I don't. Do you want to?
You want me to jump in?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I am here because I lived in Pemberton from 2002 to 2004. And most importantly, I lived on the haunted floor. So as Mike mentioned, Pemberton is a very old building. So, but it was added on to as the university expanded. So there's an old wing and a new wing. The new wing is boring and we don't talk about them. But the old wing, in particular, 3 old, as we called it. So the 3rd floor on the old side was where all the haunting was supposed to take place. And I lived in the room that was supposed to be below the piano. And in the first fall I lived there, there was a lot of work going on upstairs. So what they would tell us is, or at least what the RAs told us when we lived there, was it used to be like graduate student housing up there, or like for like older students. The rooms were a little bit bigger. And although Pemberton did have some of the bigger rooms on campus, but the floorboards were weak and they didn't want to put in the expense to fix them. So they closed off the 4th floor. Graduate student housing moved off campus into much crappier accommodations. But there was a piano up there and they were doing work on the 4th floor while I lived there. And my good friend who lived next door to me one afternoon realized that the workers had left that door open, and she did sneak up there and confirm there is indeed a piano up there. And one of the main stories you'd hear, and when you'd move into Pemberton, they'd tell you all the good ghost stories about the new haunted dorm you just moved into. And the biggest one was always that sometimes in the middle of the night, you'd hear the sound of piano music coming from the 4th floor. So, I mean, if there was someone up there like Phantom of the Operating Pemberton's piano, I guess that could have happened because there was a piano. Yeah, as Mike said, it was kind of the same way. There were always different versions of the story of what happened to Mary, but they all seem to agree that she played the piano, she was murdered on site, and no one could help her, and she's never really graduated, I guess you could say. So I've said in the intervening years that Mary really spurned me because, again, I lived on the haunted floor beneath the piano and I never saw or heard anything. However, I was good friends with most of my neighbors, so you'd hear stories from other people. The room I lived in before I moved in, because I lived in a different one and I made friends with that girl and I moved in, it's like college girl shit. So in the room I moved into, she said early on in the year, we had transoms over our doors because it was an older building, and she would close the transom at night and she would wake up in the morning to it being open. And it was fairly sturdy. Like I said, I lived in the room. Like, you really kind of had to, give it a little effort to open it. So I guess it could have just been slipping, but I don't know. And my other friend, the one who had snuck up to the 4th floor and found the piano, she came into my room one night and she was really shaken up, and she told me that she had been waiting downstairs in the lobby to meet someone, and she'd been all alone, and she'd heard what sounded like women's high-heeled shoes walking towards her, and because she was waiting for someone, she turned around and no one was there. And I mean, I will say, like, I always found Pemberton a really, like, warm, friendly place to live. I really liked living there. But there were certain parts of it that just had kind of an atmosphere to it. In particular, the basement. It really felt like a place you would get murdered. Like, if I wanted to describe the aura of the basement, it was, you might get murdered here. And adding to that, they would turn our dorm into a haunted house around this time of year because why not? Ghosts included, but there was one year where they had made the basement, there were all these like weird passageways and tunnels down there, not like tunnels, but just these, it felt like being in a submarine, and you could walk through there to go to the laundry room. But they had like outlined like bodies on the floor, so there were like these weird body outlines and stuff, and it was creepy. But I never saw a ghost. But yeah, that's my story at Pemberton. The interesting thing about that was my same friend I keep referencing, she was a history major, and she got very into this legend, and she started researching it for a class project, I think, or maybe just for her own interest. Like I said, this was 18 years ago, but the conclusion she came to over time is that she thinks that the legend of Mary may have been a cover-up story, because it was rumored at the time that Mary Hawkins was brought over personally from England by Livingston Lord, who was, I think, the first or one of the first presidents of Eastern Illinois University, and that they had had an affair. And then this story was concocted to kind of cover that all up. And we knew that she had died of syphilis because, again, my friend, she was a good researcher. And I said, you could add to the evidence if you found out if Livingston Lord had syphilis or had died of syphilis. But she got too scared and she wouldn't do it. She was like, oh, no, I don't want to cause trouble. So that's where the story ends for me. But
so two things. One, I believe, so one of those haunted houses that you talked about,
mm-hmm.
They did have someone dress up as Mary and play the piano. And I believe they had like fake blood that was on the keys or on the floor that kind of would give people a shock if they snuck up there. Did you see anything like that?
No, I've actually never been on the 4th floor. Just Allison. She's the only one that ever made it up. Yeah.
So like historically, I'm just looking at this publication that I put out a couple of years ago on Pemberton Hall. And Mary Hawkins came to the United States in 1901, and she didn't become dorm director until 1910. So that was like a 9-year gap there. I'm not sure what she did during that time. So who knows?
Yeah, my understanding was, and again, this is all very fuzzy, and maybe my brain is just like smoothing over gaps, but my understanding was that she had like worked for their family, or in some capacity that she was connected with that family in a not superficial way. And then she was promoted to that position. But again, like, I'm trying to remember like a conversation I had in the early 2000s. So.
Well, apparently there was an article that came out in the Journal Gazette a couple years ago where one of Mary's relatives from England came to visit, and they said there were rumors that somebody had her diary.
Oh.
But they didn't know who, they didn't know like if it was legit that somebody did. But that would be really interesting to read.
Yep. Yeah, and I think I'm quoted in some of your books as a Mary skeptic.
Yes.
I've softened on old Mary over the years, but I've always really liked the idea that Mary, her story is kind of carried on as a cover up for this sex scandal, and it grew into this kind of local legend. Like, to me, that's somehow more satisfying than there's a ghost that plays the piano over your bedroom. But yeah, I like that extra dimension.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly become part of what makes Pemberton Hall so unique,
Mm-hmm.
and created a bit of a folk community there. Kind of gives it more personality to live
Mm-hmm.
there.
Yeah. I mean, if you lived in Carmen Hall, like you don't have a ghost. You just have like weird dudes puking in the hallway or something, you know.
Yeah, peeing on their roommates.
Yeah. So, um no, I mean, I lived in a couple dorms throughout my college years, and Pemberton has always been like a really special place that I lived. So, and I mean, here I am, like I haven't set foot in Charleston since in probably 8 years. And I mean, our both neither of us live there. I live in Oregon and you live in Virginia. We live on opposite ends of the country. And the thing that keeps bringing us back together is kind of that place and that time. And yeah, so I think it is a special place, whether or not there was a syphilis scandal or a ghost or whatever. The only thing we have hard evidence of is the piano. The piano's doing a lot of heavy lifting.
Yeah. Well, I used to visit Pemberton Hall sometimes, with various friends over the years, and I never really experienced anything. But I know a lot of people who have. One of my posts promoting the new book has a lot of comments on it from people who used to live there and swear that they had unusual activity.
Hmm. Yeah, I will say too, something I've realized, you ever have these realizations about like your family where your family seems normal to you, and then as you get older and move away from them, you realize they're all weird?
Uh-huh.
Um, but my family has, I would say, a greater than average number of ghost stories. Like pretty much everyone in our family has seen ghosts, plural, or like have very like repeated and intense contact with things. And like in the intervening years, like I would say I have definitely seen a ghost, but it was never in Pemberton. So that's why I really at this point I used to feel skeptical. Now I just feel snubbed by Mary. I think it was really unfriendly of her to not reveal herself to me and like scare the shit out of me when I was like going to the bathroom at night or something. Is it okay if I say swear words in this?
I guess it is now.
I can stop
Sure.
it.
I don't care. Cuss away. As long as you're not drawing obscene things or having your profile picture something nasty, I'm
All
going.
right.
I'm good.
Yeah, I don't know. There may
All
be
right.
children watching. Um, so, all right. Does anybody have any questions about Pemberton Hall? Maybe we should ask that.
Yeah.
Does Mary still ever play the piano?
That I don't know. That's a good question.
You know, actually, I can't think of a single person who I knew people like the RAs and people who lived there for a long time who would say sometimes people hear the piano. I don't know if I ever had anyone say like, yeah, I heard the piano.
Hmm.
Which may have been why we doubted there was a piano at all.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean that's sort of been incorporated into the legend because it's like the noticeable thing on the fourth floor
Mhm.
that people always remark about. But most of the ghostly activity that I read about and that was in the newspaper articles really had nothing to do with the piano.
Mhm.
It was like people would see strange things, or they would see somebody in the room, or they would, you know, there'd be like strange markings on the floor, furniture rearranging itself.
Yeah, the big
The,
thing on our floor was always either like transoms opening and closing or like doors unlocking. I
yeah,
know actually one girl, yeah, I remember her telling us the one day that she had been open or she had been awakened at night by her door blowing open, even though she had deadbolted it closed. So like messing with doors and things like that was definitely consistent.
and you can't say that it was caused by air conditioning or anything because there was no air
We did not
conditioning.
have air conditioning. It was very hot in that dorm. It was miserable in August. So
Yeah,
yeah,
so if you got a
very
cold
warm in the
spot,
winter.
you know.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, like we it was radiator heated, so I think any like bumps in the night usually came from that. I would hear things like Yeah, like that, like there were like a handprint would appear on the door, and it was always supposed to be the door she was like clawing at for help, and you couldn't wash it away, or that like people would see like a spectral woman in black in the hallway, um, or but I don't know. I like there are always rumors, like any good urban legend, but I don't know anybody who was like, yes, I went to go pee at night and I saw a ghost. It was more like the girl, I remember her door blowing. Actually, I remember that. I'd forgotten that. She was like really shaken up about it. I don't think that she made it up. And the transom was the big one. And then the other big one was Allison hearing footsteps where she was like, she came upstairs. She's like, I heard Mary, you guys. And we all get together. It was like, Allison saw Mary. But it was, she heard shoes and there was no one there. It's weird.
Huh.
You know?
All right, well, let's move on to Ashmore Estates. We can always come back to Pemberton Hall too later on down the road, but
Did
just some
anyone else
back.
have a question before we do move on? All right, I think we can move on.
All right. So Ashmore Estates, it's really weird for me because I never thought that it would get so well known. Like Pemberton Hall and Mary Hawkins was always the number one like ghost story in Coles County. Ashmore Estates was kind of like this abandoned building out in the middle of nowhere that nobody really knew what it was, or everybody just thought it was this creepy building, and they would go in there at night and risk being arrested for trespassing. But what it was originally the almshouse on the Coles County Poor Farm. So from 1870 to
Can I cut in,
1959,
Mike? What does that mean? What is an almshouse on a poor farm?
so uh, basically before there was modern welfare, so now, people can get government assistance, they get reduced, medical care costs and things like that, subsidized rent. Back in the day, prior to like the 1950s, if you were destitute, couldn't take care of yourself, a lot of people were, if they had epilepsy or they were developmentally disabled or there was, something like that, the county would actually sentence you to live on a farm, it was called a poor farm. And every county had one, and it was subsidized by the county. And there was a superintendent who, him and his family, would live in a separate house on the farm and sort of look after everybody. And they would live in what was called an almshouse. You've heard that expression, alms for the poor. It was like a charity house. And you would live there and work the land. They had people working in the kitchen. They had a whole farm. It was a whole farm. Like today, you go out there and there's just this one building. But back in the day, they had barns and, chicken coops and whatever. I was raised in this city, so I don't know what's on a farm, but whatever, gardens, whatever they had, they grow their own food. They would make their own meals and just live there. And this started at its current location in 1870. And up until 1915, there was a kind of a smaller building there. And it was said to have deplorable conditions. There were like rats running around. The roof was leaking. And the county decided that we need to tear this down. It's dangerous. There were some fires in there. So they tore it down. They built the current building there, and that opened in 1916. This is always an interesting statistic I like to bring up. So keep this in mind. In 1916, it cost $20,000 roughly to build. Okay, so going into the future, in 2013, it was bought at auction for $12,700.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, almost 100 years later, it had depreciated. It had not gone up in value. It actually
It
depreciated somehow.
depreciated from 1916 dollars too.
Yeah, so that's pretty amazing. But originally, it was a very beautiful building. It had these porches and nice roofs. You can kind of see it in this old picture. You can see what it used to look like. This is 2002 when it was abandoned. They had these porches. There's some photos online of what it looked like from the air. There's a really nice aerial photo of the poor farm in like the 1940s or something like that. And you can see all the buildings, all the outbuildings and all that. So until, let me see if I need to get my years right here. So in 1959, when they were sort of, all the counties were kind of getting rid of these institutions, they were selling them off to private corporations. And it was bought by a psychiatric facility, but it was only briefly a psychiatric facility. It never really was financially viable. Between 1959 and 1987, it was like a care facility for mentally, emotionally disturbed people, developmentally disabled people. They would get money from the state to house them there and care for them. Most of the patients were not, contrary to the legends, most of them were not violent. Although I did interview people that worked there that said there were some violent people there. There was a doctor that I interviewed who used to work there that probably regrets telling me this now, but he said he never believed in possession until he saw a woman that they brought in who actually she was strapped down with those leather restraints and actually broke them and attacked him. So he described her as being possessed. I don't know what that means, but you can decide. So that didn't last too long because they never really had the money. One of the owners built a addition to the building. So you can see today there's like the front part of the building is this like beautiful like Georgian architecture, and then the back of the building is just this plain like cement cube, and that was the addition that was built in the 1970s. Let's see. So then it closed down. There was a legend that in 1987 that they just left the patients in there. There were other stories that there was like one of the patients went insane and murdered a bunch of people there. But the staff actually continued working there after they had stopped getting paid. They actually like volunteered their time to make sure that all the residents got where they needed to go before it closed down. And over the years, local teens and students from Eastern Illinois University would go out there and scare themselves and find like old records and things that had been left in the building. I talked to somebody, I wrote a paper about the history of the Poor Farm and presented it at the Illinois History Conference. I don't remember when, I think it was like 2010. And somebody in the audience told me that they had gone in there in the 90s, and all like the filing cabinets were still there with all the patient records and everything. So it just sort of became like this place for people to go. And it was rumored that there was like satanic activity and everything like that. But then it was bought in 2006 by a man named Scott Kelly, and he turned it into a haunted house, like a commercial haunted attraction, and kind of brought in groups to investigate it because everybody thought it was haunted. There were always the stories, even though there was never really any specific stories. It was like everybody just assumed it was. So he would have groups come in there and investigate. And eventually it got on Ghost Adventures and Ghost Hunters. I was interviewed for the Ghost Adventures episode. Oh, there. Okay. So Becky has the picture there of what the Poor Farm looked like from the air.
Oh, wow.
And you can see the barn and all the little outbuildings, and that big white house is where the superintendent and his family would live during the winter, because it was heated. And but the house was moved. They moved that house to Ashmore a while ago. But you can see like where there used to be bushes and sidewalks, all overgrown with grass now. But it was really a beautiful building. So just to give me a break from talking here for a second,
Yeah.
Kelly, would you like to share what was your take us through your first encounter with Ashmore Estates?
So I will say I've just learned a ton from you, Mike, because all I knew was when I was a freshman at EIU was that one of my friends said, there's an abandoned insane asylum on the edge of Charleston. And so of course I wanted to go there. I don't remember the first time I went there. I think we probably drove out there with a couple of friends and just looked in the door or something. I don't know. But the first time I remember was it was Halloween, and it was our crew, Mike, what would have been my sophomore year, Buck and Miranda and Brent and those guys. And we got this idea, let's all drive out there and go in the insane asylum at midnight on Halloween. And we did. We didn't bring any flashlights. We just went in and walked around, and probably lucky we didn't fall down the stairs or anything. And then I went back a third time with a friend from one of my art classes because she was really intrigued by it. And she's like, can you show me where it is? And I said, absolutely. And so I went there in the day for the first time. And on the inside, I just remember it being pretty trashed. Just obviously years of teenagers going in there and knocking stuff around and spray painting stupid stuff on the walls, gateway to hell over what the elevator shaft or whatever. I remember there was I think it must have been a boiler room or something, but just this big room on the lower floor with lots of pipes and stuff. It looked like something out of Nightmare on Elm Street.
That would be the boiler room, yes.
It would be the boiler room.
Yep.
All right. And I remember finding that creepy. But again, I don't know. We didn't see any ghosts or anything. I don't know if it is even haunted. I think the interest for us was just that it was this old building with a scary past, and it was fun to trespass. I think the third thing was probably the most exciting thing about it, just trespassing on someone else's property. But
Is that your article, Michael?
Yes, it is actually.
I recognize the picture.
Yeah, they took out the folklore parts of it. It's all that's all just the history of the Poor Farm.
yeah, I don't have much of a story about it. I would just tell people when I was in college, yeah, I went to Ashmore Estates at midnight on Halloween. It was dark,
I was in there a lot as a teenager when it was still abandoned. We were in there a lot.
Mm-hmm.
What years about was that?
Let's see, probably late 80s, early 90s.
Oh wow! Did you see like all the records and stuff?
Not a whole lot. There was when we would come inside the back window, because you're going in the not legal way. There was a broken window. We could go down into like the kitchen area. So there was like the refrigerator was still there, the appliances were still there. There was some of the beds that were still there. Um, mostly just things like that. By then, I think most of the records and stuff like that had been pilfered out of the building. Um,
Hmm.
a lot of remnants of what appeared to be satanic rituals and stuff. Whether or not they were legit ones, who knows? But there was always, the candles. Sometimes you'd find the dead animals in there. Um, so there definitely was, and of course, I've spent a lot of time there with not when the Kellys owned it, but with the brief owners between the Kellys and Robin, who owns it now. When the tornado ripped off the roof of the building,
Yeah.
um, a friend of mine and I held a big fundraiser to get the repair money for the building. So when this second person bought the building, we stayed involved because we didn't know this person well enough to just hand over that amount of money that we had gotten from sponsors and donors and stuff. So we stayed involved. So we did a lot of the overnight investigations and stuff in the building and took teams in and stuff. So I mean, I can definitely say it is haunted. There is stuff there. Um, is it evil, demonic? Ooh, gonna kill you kind of stuff? No. But if you're there, you will find. I mean, you will find stuff. Um,
No, and I actually, when I got interviewed for Ghost Adventures, Zach Baggins kept trying to get me to say that there was like demonic activity in the
Lord,
building, and
the only thing demonic in that building was him.
yeah,
Hard
I,
agree.
I mean, I had been in there like literally dozens of times by myself when it was abandoned, when people were in there. Like, I never really sensed any kind of negative energy or anything like that. I
Yeah,
was going to ask.
I mean, it never really, like, it was kind of creepy, but you never got that, like, there's someone looking over your shoulder feeling, or like chills up your spine or anything. It was just, it was just an abandoned building. It just felt very empty.
Becky, can you
Yeah.
tell us some of the like specific ghosts that people talk about that are there?
Um, Elva, I don't know a lot of the details, but Elva Skinner was a little girl who, the story I believe is that her dress had caught on fire and she burned up in the building.
Yeah,
Um,
she died in the original building.
yes, yeah. So of course, a lot of people say that there's contact with her. Then there's Mary. Again, I don't know a lot of Mary's story. I know she's got a room at the front. I guess it would be the east side upstairs. Um, that was her room. Um, you can't. It said you can't put anything up over the windows because she doesn't like it. She'll tear it down. I have been in the building before when they've had plywood over that window and have heard it come down. And the one night there was a camera on it and it literally went straight up in the air and then flew off on the camera. So it was definitely not just fell off. um, and then there's Joe Bloxham. That was his last name, I believe, who was the caretaker there at the facility and had been hit by a train and walked back to the facility and then ended up passing away there.
Hmm.
So those are the three main ones I know of off the top of my head.
This is something I always thought was really unusual. There was like one window that was bricked up, and I always kind of wondered why that was. I think it went to a bathroom, actually.
Is it the one in the basement?
No, I think this
Oh,
is
okay.
this is on the top floor.
Oh, okay. Because there was a lunchroom in the basement. I believe it was the lunchroom that was all the windows were bricked up, and they've uncovered those.
Hmm.
They've taken those out now, and you can actually see the original windows. So that was pretty cool. I was looking, trying to find the video. During that time, we were helping out. Um, a news channel came out and interviewed us at the building, and we walked down into the boiler room, and the cameraman panned around to the room that's behind the boiler room, kind of panned around and then turned around to face us, and we were talking, and all of a sudden you hear like this clunk sound, and the cameraman screams obscenities, and it was actually a light bulb that when he panned around was laying on the table behind him that had flew over and hit him in the head. And so it was all on video, and they posted it online, but I'm trying to find the actual news article or the news video. But it was pretty funny, but he was just like, he panicked and freaked and said a few words he wasn't supposed to on the news.
I have two interviews on YouTube that I did with one person was named Nancy Swinford. She was the daughter of one of the superintendents, and she grew up on the farm. So I taped an interview with her back. God, I don't even remember when. Maybe 2006. I did the interview. So that's really interesting. She talks about what life was like growing up there, and I put another interview up on YouTube I did with Mark Temples, whose wife worked there as a nurse in, I believe, the early 1980s. And he helped them, he was a journalist, and he helped them publish their little newsletter. They had like their own Ashmore Estates newsletter that they would write. And he told me some interesting things. They used to play basketball in the attic because there's like a big open space. So they actually had a basketball team that would go and like play other teams in the area. So that was kind of interesting. But it was a big part of the community. And I don't know what it's like today, but when I was first starting to research it, it was really difficult to find information about it. It was kind of like people didn't really want to talk about it or write about it. I think there was like in the genealogy section, there was like a notebook with a bunch of newspaper clippings and stuff about it, but that was pretty much it. It was kind of like this thing that people were kind of ashamed of.
I imagine there's a lot of stigma attached to anything related to poverty or things like that.
Yeah, for sure. I think until the paranormal became more talked about and accepted, the building was linked to, mental illness, poverty, tragedy. And so nobody really talked about it much. It wasn't until the paranormal stuff got bigger. Now you've had several TV shows filmed out there, you've had movies made out there, you've had music videos made out there. You can search Ashmore Estates and find all kinds of stuff. Um, most of it is probably inaccurate, other than the people who have truly researched it, like like Michelle Baker, who is pretty much the historian for Ashmore Estates. The actual website for Ashmore Estates, which is, I believe, ashmoreestates.net, has all of the actual history for the building. But then, of
We
course,
were,
sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say that right before Scott Kelly sold the building and moved, we were working on. You were you part of that project? We're trying to put a documentary together about it, and it never really got off the ground.
Right. I remember that happening, but I didn't remember if it ever came to fruition.
Yeah, it never did.
Yeah, that's too bad. I mean, it would really be a neat thing to do as a historical documentary versus as just the paranormal part.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, it's too bad what happened with the storms and everything. But from what
Yes.
I've seen, the new owner, Robin Terry, has done a really good job
Robin's done,
fixing it up.
yes, he's done fantastic. And it just wasn't, I mean, I don't know if he looked into it once he bought the building, but I know when we did the fundraising for the roof, to try to put that original roof back on with that attic was is in like the 6 digits.
Yeah, I can
I mean,
imagine.
it was insane to put on that attic again with that vaulted roof. And so that's why we had opted to just do the flat roof like it has now. Um, and I'm sure Robin probably looked into it as well when he purchased the property. Um, but it was bad because they put down the flat roof. I don't know who they hired to do it, but they didn't do a really good job. So another storm came through and ripped up most of that. So Robin pretty much had to fix it all over again. Um, and I'm sorry if you hear snoring. That's my dog. I don't know if you can hear that in the background, but I can see the microphone thing move when he does it. So, but yeah, it's but it does look amazing in there. It's got running water again. It's got electricity again all throughout it. There's camera system, which if you've seen, well, you're not local anymore, so you probably haven't seen it. But there was been several people that have broke in,
Yeah, I
and
did see
they
that on
have
the page on Facebook.
they have real high quality video in there now. So it didn't take long for him to put out a thing like who are these kids, and they had like 9 people pinpointed in like 24 hours. So,
Wow.
but those cameras are there for ghosts for teams and stuff as well. So they have access to that. There's a couple break rooms that are all furnished. They held a lot of events out there now, and it's really nice. He's done amazing things with it. So, and they do a lot of charity work for Lost Limbs Foundation out there.
Yeah, it's really kind of a success story. If
Mm-hmm.
you compare it to places like, what was the name of the building at Peoria State Hospital, the Bowen building that got torn down, where they tried to do a similar thing out there and raise money to restore it and get rid of the asbestos and stuff. But unfortunately, it ended up being torn down.
Yeah, I mean, enough of it is original that you still get the creepy old abandoned building vibe. There is rooms that um, the drywall or whatever's peeling off the walls, and there is a lot of that still that old creepy fallen apart abandoned building vibe. But he has definitely, I mean, any you can tell that any money he makes from investigations and stuff goes right back into that building. He's done wonderful with it. Built a few bunkhouses on the outside so that teams can actually stay there. So there's a couple bunkhouses out there with a fire pit and stuff so that teams can stay. So
That's really
it's
cool.
That is
yeah,
really cool.
yep. It's a good place, and it's I don't know, but it's definitely haunted. Like I said, I don't think there's anything demonic there, but you are pretty much guaranteed no matter when you go to feel something, see something, hear something. Um, I've had several. I mean, have been in that building so many times overnight that I've always had experiences, but a lot of the time for me, it's been touching. I was up on the 3rd floor with 2 other people one night, and I thought one of them had come up behind me and put their hand on my shoulder. So I like turned around and said something, and they didn't answer me. So I said their name a little bit louder, and they didn't answer me. So finally I yelled, and they like both of them yelled from the other end of the building. And they're like, "What? Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Weren't you just not right here touching my back?" And they're like, "No, we're all the way down here." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." But little things like that happen. You'll feel the little girl tug on your clothes. But nothing bad, unless you're a reporter that gets a light bulb thrown at your head. But people always ask me what's the scariest thing that ever happened to you in that building. And honestly, for me, it was not something paranormal. I was downstairs in the boiler room, which has its creepy vibe anyway. It's pretty much the same as probably what you saw at that state. And I was down there, and all of a sudden I felt something pounce onto my foot, and I about had a heart attack. It happened. It was a stray cat.
Oh,
It was when Kelly still owned it then, and they had a broken window, and this cat jumped in. It had been wanting us to pet it when we were outside, and we closed the doors and went in the building, and he jumped through this window and landed on me and scared the crap right out of me.
I would die. I would just have a heart.
Yes. Yep. I about had a heart attack, about peed myself, and I'm like, okay, yeah. So I'm like, you can give me anything dead, just don't have a live animal come after me, because I'm done.
Does anybody have any questions about Ashmore Estates?
For me, not really. Just for me, it sounds like most of the energy that there is residual, mostly.
There were almost, I mean, I don't think anybody knows the exact number of people that died there over the years, but it was enough to fill 2 cemeteries. I know it was almost several dozen, if not almost 100, I think I read somewhere.
Yeah, and there is definitely a lot of residual there. There is a couple intelligent, though, that will respond, that will react to individuals, but there is definitely a lot of residual.
Yeah. Though, quick question. So, actually, not more of a question, but more so me say something. But I really like, what's his name again? That currently owns the building, has been taking care of it.
The current one is Robin Terry, sorry.
Yeah. I really enjoy people doing that because it's history that they're keeping alive.
Yeah.
And that's something that, for that big of a place, should be taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. Yeah, and Robin also owns and lives in the Haunted R Theater in, oh my goodness.
I think it's is it
Auburn.
Auburn?
Auburn, yeah. It's an old theater they've restored and made it their home, and you can also investigate there.
Yeah,
so
That's really
and
nice.
it's not just history, but it's history of groups that aren't often remembered. So
right.
people who are mentally ill, or people who are disabled, or just lower class people in general. Like, a lot of times when we tell our histories, those are the people we leave out. And I think as a community, we left them out by allowing that that whole area to kind of disintegrate. And through the work that yourself, Mike, and others have done, it keeps their stories alive to some extent, and keeps them as a piece of our history.
Right. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And it's not even that, but they could also be family too. You never know.
Mm-hmm.
If you grew up in that area, you forgot about them. You may go looking for something to remind you of them, but you can't find it if it's all taken away.
Yeah, it's really made me reflect, just as we're talking here, how recently it is in our history that we acknowledge our disabled friends or family. That it wasn't all that long ago that those were people that you would keep hidden inside your house because their families would feel ashamed of them, or and how much how much our relationship to the disabled members of our community have changed. So
right. And I mean, any of the different people in our family, I mean, we're still making progress with LGBT and stuff like that. But yeah, for sure. I mean, I do a lot of genealogy stuff. So the history, and that's what I like to find when I'm doing the genealogy, the stories, the where they lived, what they did, who they were, versus
Yeah,
not just their
I
name.
special ed, so I think that kind of like
Yeah,
made me feel the warm fuzzies a little bit. Just a little bit. That we
yeah,
talk about that.
yeah. I have a high functioning autistic child who's also LGBT, so
Mhm.
I totally get it.
Awesome. Good job, guys. I didn't do anything. I just went and stomped around there when I was a teenager.
Well, it's
You
good to
did
get all these
plenty.
different perspectives, because it really, especially like, so we have me and Kelly. We went to EIU. We're EIU students. Becky, you actually grew up in the area, so we have some pretty good perspectives here about how different people viewed Ashmore Estates. And it definitely was like when I wrote about um, one of my least successful books was a book of ghost stories and legends of Illinois colleges and universities. And what I started to notice is that every university had some like nearby location that the students would journey to. It's called legend tripping, where they would go and try to scare themselves or like test their bravery, or you know, these sites are supposed to be the scene of some sort of supernatural activity. And Ashmore Estates was that for students from EIU.
Yeah,
Um,
because it's boring. There's nothing to do. We go walk around Walmart in the middle of the night. Like there's nothing to do.
There
yeah, I
really is
remember
nothing to do around
that.
here.
Yeah.
No.
Well, I was saying to you the other night, Mike, that I've kind of developed this belief in recent years that the Midwestern states in particular are uniquely haunted in some ways, or I don't know if haunted is the right word, but just uniquely filled with weird stuff that as I've because I've lived around the world, I've lived in different parts of the country, and I find that like there just isn't as rich a history of just weird stuff, for lack of a more descriptive term, in other areas. I mean, my partner is from Ireland, and he's the one who kind of pointed this out. He said, I'm from the place where all the where you're supposed to see ghosts, and he's like, we don't have any ghost stories, but you have like 90 just from your hometown, and then from Chicago and Coles County and just these other places around Illinois. There's just so much. I think I mentioned to Mike, if you can find it, there's this really great documentary film called Wisconsin Death Trip, where these filmmakers it was just like this one area in Wisconsin, and they just went through the newspaper archives of like a 10-year period in the 19th century of all the like weird stuff that went on there. And I don't know if it's because we're bored or we're isolated or it's really cold in the winter and we all go a little crazy, but I think the Midwest really has its own special energy, and it really brings out the paranormal side of human experience. And you wouldn't think so, because you think we're just kind of nice and polite and kind of
Right.
boring, but I think that
Right. I
brings
think a lot of it is we had so many conflicts here. Being in the middle of the United States, you had, the people coming over from other countries and then fighting with the Native Americans, and just so much trauma and death. And then you got the Civil War stuff, North and South, you got all that death and stuff there in the center. I think a lot of it is a lot of emotion and just pent up energy in these areas.
So one of the reasons I wrote this book is because I think Coles County is a really interesting place. And yeah, every comedian that comes to EIU has the joke about, oh, there's nothing but cornfields around there.
Mhm.
But there's a lot of really unique things that happen in its history and a lot of interesting places that are around there.
Yeah, I don't think I told you this, Mike. I had maybe a year or two ago this very weird synchronicity with Mattoon, because I used to host a regular trivia night here in Portland, where I live now, and something about Burger King came up, and I told that story about how there's no Burger King because of
Yeah.
the other Burger King in Mattoon. And I realized that as I was saying this, like there was this framed picture in the room where I hosted it that was it said Mattoon, Illinois on it. It was some old wood or something that had been like cut up and repurposed as a picture frame. And I told this story about Mattoon when on the same day when they'd hung up this thing that said Mattoon on it. It was kind of weird.
Huh.
That is weird.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
interesting.
so Central Illinois making itself known.
Right. Yeah, you can't escape it. Trust me, I've been trying for 45 years.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've never, Mike, I've never had a friend like you that will literally call me up in the middle of the night and just be like, do you want to go see a bridge where a torso was found in the 80s? So
we're weirdos. We're good friends to have sometimes.
and I think too, like Port, not to get too far off track, but like Portland's history is very like piratey. Like this was like a huge pirate town. I think like one of the main industries was just Shanghaiing people up until like the early 1910s, and it still just does not have the same kind of presence for me that places I lived in Illinois did. I think. Yeah. Not as there's just not like it doesn't feel like there's as many like haunted places or just like I mean in my hometown like we're like oh yeah there's that mausoleum where the vampires are and like you know lots of ghost stories and like satanic stories and all this just so much and even Chicago too. Chicago has a ton of ghost stories, so I don't think it's just a small town thing. But
it's Chicago is supposed to be one of the most haunted cities in America.
we did not keep Portland weird enough. It's way weirder in the Midwest.
Oh,
Nice.
there you go. There's a picture of Pemberton Hall.
Mhm.
I think that's from my book, my Legends of Illinois Colleges.
Nice.
Yes, yes, it is.
Yes, that's one of the only copies that anybody has. Thank you, Brian.
So
yes.
I want to touch up on something real quick. So speaking of abandoned buildings and like the school thing you were talking about for universities and being able to go to someplace that's haunted. So it wasn't necessarily university, but it was high school for me. There was this abandoned school that wasn't far from it. But I looked into the history of it. It didn't become abandoned but a few months before, and there were already rumors of it being haunted. And I went in there myself, and I don't think it was more so a haunt or like the feelings of anything bad happening there. I just feel like it's the energy of the rumors that spread it about it that put all that energy in there and what people have done to it because it looked horrible after a few months of shutting down. It was really bad.
Yeah, I think a lot of times, unfortunately, people do go in and they vandalize these places. People who are bored and they just have some destructive impulse. But in a lot of ways, I think that these stories help preserve the memory of these places. A lot of times, if it wasn't for the rumors of these places being haunted or the talk about it, a lot of them would just be forgotten and nobody would ever really look into the history of it or find out like what it was or what it was used for. So in a lot of ways, I think these stories help keep the memory alive.
Yeah, and I agree with that. The building was great and big, so it was definitely something good to explore.
And I think they do help us connect to one another and build communities. And I mean, like, these are stories from a place I spent 2 years in my late teens, and it's, like, it's helped me reconnect with my friend Mike and helped me come here and talk to all you guys. Like these kind of spooky stories are really a way for people to connect, and I think that's cool too.
Oh, for sure. Like I didn't know Mike when he was going to school here. It wasn't until afterwards when I started in the paranormal stuff and started holding events that I got to meet Mike and become friends with him. And so it's one of those things where I'm, always going to be grateful for my connection here because it's, put me in touch with a lot of interesting people, especially in the paranormal and with all the events and such.
Well, I hate to say it, but I have to get up early for work tomorrow. So I need to be getting ready for bed.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming, and I will post this video online so people can go back and watch it.
Oh, that's cool. Thank you very much for doing this, Becky and Kelly, for coming and sharing your stories, and everybody coming out and talking with us. It's been great.
Yeah, you ever want to hear some true ghost stories? I'll tell you ones that'll curl your hair, man.
There you go. We can do that one night too if you want.
I would
Nice. Sounds good.
Yeah. The only
And
person regularly is my boyfriend, and he has heard all of them 3 times.
there you go. Well, we should do it. And Jody, please tell William, or not, if he comes back and watches this, that I'm really sorry that he got locked out, and for whatever reason I couldn't get him back in. But hopefully he'll come back and watch the video and know that I tried and I'm sorry.
Well, bye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks,
Well, it
everyone.
was nice meeting you.
Halloween.
What?
They have a great night and a happy Halloween.
Oh, yeah. Happy Halloween, everybody.
Yeah. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.